Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning, James Kennett shirt. How are you this morning, James?
Very well. I'm just trying to get that light out of the back. There we go.
Well, nice of you to join me.
My pleasure.
Finally. Hey, we go back a long way. I mean, you're one of the people I've known longest in life, just about.
Yes, yeah, our boarding school days and all that.
That's right.
Yeah, I thought you were a bit of a coastal fellow, though, only coming from Hewenden, given that I came from Mount Isa. So.
Well, that's right. You came from even further out, but more importantly, you were a golf champion, weren't you, back in your Mount Isa days?
Oh, well, modesty prevents me from labouring the point too much. But at 8 years of age, yes, I was junior champion in Mount Isa, and playing with Greg Norman, who was 2 years older than me, or his, and he was junior champion at the time. The difference between us is that I was consistent with my golf, and he was very inconsistent. He continually got better.
Well, obviously, yes. Obviously, he did. But tell me about your dad too. Your dad was involved in an industry close to my heart.
Yes, yeah, he was the man from Prudential for a while, and then as it went through various iterations and mergers, he was a very successful insurance agent in the Northwest and had his own plane. Used to fly around to properties that wouldn't see people for months on end. And back then, of course, there was the probate tax, death duty, and he would solve people's problems in terms of writing life policies on the principle of the property and save the day for the family in the event that the patron died. Of course, when death duties were dropped, the nature of that business changed, and he went into a different course of business.
Sure. The what was it that brought you down to the Gold Coast? Because being a good TSS boy, you were a day boy back in the day.
No, I started off 2 years as a boarder. Came down from the west.
Okay.
My parents realised very quickly. Well, for starters, there were very few day boys allowed at TSS back then. It was very much a Westerners boarding school, as you'd remember. But the opportunity to come down was through another connection, another kid at the school whose parents were raving about it, and so Mum and Dad took the chance, and then 2 years later decided that there was no point in them staying out west, so they came and moved to the Gold Coast. Thank heavens! So Dad set up a safe company down here, and so when I finished school, I did a gap year working with him. I realised very quickly that I didn't want to work on big lumps of metal, but developed it into an alarm business.
Okay, hence Kennett Security. But before we get to there, I mean, obviously you're involved in rowing at TSS, and as you know, the Head of the River was just last weekend. So rowing was one of your sports back at school, and so I'm just going to give you a lead in for that, and then your year at Gordonston.
Yes, yeah, I really had a great time at TSS. It brought out the best in me, and the great thing about that school is it teaches you to serve so that you know how to lead, and that was I learned some great lessons growing up there, and that brotherhood that is created, particularly amongst the boarding community, is something that you never lose. It's a real asset to carry forward in life. But believe it or not, Mark and I'm heavier than Mark. Of course, he's svelte and good looking, but I'm actually a denser unit in more ways than one than Mark. But at school, I was along with another friend of ours. I was the shortest kid in the school going into grade 12. So my rowing history wasn't so much as a rower, but as a cox, and I had the benefit of the cox of our first 8 at the time was I think Australian champion and Australia's best, and so I got some special coaching from him, which paid off, and I turned out to have a pretty good run as a cox. And once you're on the water, the cox is the boss, so you're also accountable for things that go wrong. So I really enjoyed the lessons learned in relationships and life that I gained out of that sport.
Absolutely. Do you want to talk? Yeah, Gordonston. You did a
Yeah,
gap year over at Gordonston.
Yeah, well, it wasn't such a gap year. It was a way of repeating senior, as it turned out. The new headmaster who came in midway through our time at school had come from. He'd been director of studies at Gordonston School in Scotland, it's the home of Outward Bound. It's the first school in the world to have adopted an outdoor education approach, and it's the school's philosophy is you can't force a student to learn, but you must impel them into experience. And so they just throw you into an extraordinary range of experiences, from mountain rescue to seamanship to community service, and into areas of service that you wouldn't expect kids to get into. I mean, we were dropped in by helicopter to go searching for people missing in blizzards, and then we'd go around and visit not just old people's homes, but psychiatric wards. And when you're 16, 17, 18, that's pretty scary, eye-opening stuff. So, the school just gave you this incredible breadth of experience, aside from a great education as well. So I came back from that and repeated senior, because in those days it's different to the way they do it now. I got assessed for one semester in the last 10 weeks of school. I came back and just did 10 weeks, and then they doubled that semester score. So managed to get me into uni. But the uni I got into was Griffith University in its very first year. So I turned up for its opening day to hear a bearded professor going on about how it would be a very radical university and how we'd be demonstrating all the ills of the world in the street. And so I supported his plan for demonstration by standing up, pointing out that wasn't why I wanted to go to university, and walked out. And about 20 people followed me out from that first cohort. So I don't think I achieved what he was really looking for out of that. But of course, in the meantime, Griffiths has become a very conservative university. And it was ironic that about 20 years after that episode, I was invited back to go on to a board of one of their schools there. So it was funny how the wheel turned. But
absolutely.
Because of that, I took a year off and worked for my father. Because of the client base buying safes, he would get the inquiries about the occasional alarm system, which was quite a novelty back in the early 70s. And I learned very quickly how to run cables and install very, very basic alarms. The technology back then was pretty primitive. But I was also carrying security mirrors, those convex mirrors around, and I would just go into supermarkets or shops or whatever and demonstrate them, and usually sell a couple in each shop. And I was making so much money out of that, far more money than my father had been making out of the business, that I realized that there might be something in this. So I extended my delay into university by another year. And then 20 years later, when I was employing over 100 people, I sold that company for a very comfortable figure. So it was funny how life twists and turns and leads you down a path you weren't expecting.
Absolutely. I remember when I first came back after university in Townsville, back to the coast, there were Kennett security signs on just about every house you went past, weren't there, back in the day? And that was all your business.
Great. It was, Dad, this sounds almost comical, but it wasn't at the time. Dad dropped a fireproof filing cabinet, a very heavy unit with a sort of a rim base to it, dropped it straight on his two big toes, and that put him in bed for 9 months, and really stopped him from earning a living. So I'd actually done everything but sign up to go and fly helicopters in the Army at that stage, and I had to drop those plans and become the breadwinner for the family straight away. And so I dropped the safe business very quickly and just focused on the alarm business and developed a monitoring company at that stage. It was good fortune, good timing, the right product, the right need. The coast was just going through its first big boom, and the technology for security was just coming of age at the same time. And I was, so I really had to make a go of it or starve. No other option back in those days. So a fair bit of perseverance and commitment and frustration, but at the end of the day, and the reality was, I was a 22-year-old when I really started the the alarm business in earnest. And what do you know at 22? You know, the importance of relationships, the ability to manage staff in a very stressful situation. You know, the ability to work with clients where they're putting their life savings in some cases. You know, jewelry stock, for example. Jewelers would entrust me with their life savings. It's a lot of responsibility to take on, and so I really felt that whilst I was thrown in the deep end, you know, that's the best way to learn. You know, when you just don't have an option of, you know, failing, when you have to get it right. So yeah,
Sure.
it was a good learning curve.
James, one of the other things I remember back in those days for you was your relationship with Rotary. Now, you're one of the people. You're a Paul Harris Fellow. You've been chairman or president of your is it the Southport Club or the main, whichever club you're in. You've been president on at least two occasions. Broadwater, you've been president on at least two occasions. But I want to hear more about, you did a lot of work back in the early days, and I remember with Keith Abraham and others, Karen Phillips. Certainly you were involved in Rotary Youth Leadership camps and so on, and you helped a lot of young kids out of school in regard to getting a start, understanding relationships and how to deal with people and so on. So do you want to talk about those sorts of things that you're doing as part of your Rotary experience? You don't have to, but can you hear me, James?
Yeah. One of the great things I got in my life. I had been invited to attend a RILA camp, a Rotary Youth Leadership camp, when I was 19. And that was one of the really significant life experiences I had. It's a week-long residential camp where you have world-class leaders, speakers coming in and you know, really giving you insight into personal development of your leadership skills. And because of that, because I was in business at a young age, and they were starting a new Rotary club, and back then the entry for Rotary was very exclusive. It was you know, it was a fairly cliquey business organisation, but they were setting up a new club, and I think they were just desperately trying to find the last couple of members to hit the critical number for chartering the club. And one of my clients, a local successful businessman, put in. I was accepted because I was, in fact, you know, one of the rules where you had to be a leader in your field. Well, I was the only one in my field, and so they sort of bent the rules. You know, normally you'd be over 40 before you got invited in, and I figured, given that fairly extraordinary opportunity to network with, you know, the leaders of all businesses in the region, that I really owed Rotary something for that, and I really had better earn my keep, and I'd better be seen to be earning my keep. So, because I had been at a RILA camp, I could join the district committee for Rotary that organised and ran that camp. And by good fortune, I did that for a year, and then they separated two districts, an area north of Brisbane River and then an area south. And just as it turned out, I was the only Rotarian in the Southern District who had any experience with the camps, with the RILA camp particularly.
Yep.
So I was made chairman. So at 24, I was a district chairman for Rotary, and again, that was pretty extraordinary. But because I understood the camp really well, and I had the benefit of bringing in older, very, very capable Rotarians into the mix, they could compensate my many weaknesses, and they got the picture pretty quickly. But because I had such a passion for the camp and had learned so much, and it was to sort of show that enthusiasm in leading the team, and then the more responsible older Rotarians managed to successfully fill in all the gaps that I left there. So we turned out having three, because you only do a stint of 3 years at a time, and we had three incredibly successful camps that had all sorts of spin-offs from it, and just incredible relationships. Given that you've got 100 of the young leaders of the city going through this camp each year, you can imagine how that comes back to you over, you know, later years. And that was the thing I learned, was that the big lesson I've learned in life is that whatever you do, the more you give, as corny as it sounds, the greater the gifts, the more you receive. And it's not that you set out to do that. That's not the purpose of doing community service or committing to some sort of service activity. But it's just inevitable that, and in my case, it was that a lot of older businessmen, business people, and community leaders saw that I was in there pushing hard, putting in a lot of effort, and it gave me a level of credibility that I couldn't possibly have earned any other way through business. And so it just gave me entree into all sorts of opportunities. One of which was I was nominated to be chairperson of International Youth Year in 1986, which was a fun, very bureaucratic exercise, but it was a good learning curve for me, and we had a pretty successful year. And then the following year, by just amazing coincidence and connections, the government was releasing the new FM radio stations. We're just starting the process, and a couple of there were 23 syndicates put together to ask for the FM license for the Gold Coast, what became CFM, now one of the national groups. And each syndicate was looking for representatives of the community, and of course that included youth. So I was invited onto a couple of these syndicates that were made up of the richest enough of people around town. And I had to pick one, and I fortunately picked the right one. And we actually won the license, and so I got to be one of the founders of GCFM Proprietary Limited, it was. Very quickly, our old competitor 4GG, which had become 4GGG, then K-Rock, basically went broke because of the old operation. And we took them over. That subsequently became Gold FM, now Triple M. And the group finished up buying a number of other radio stations around Queensland and New South Wales, and ultimately sold it to Reg Grundy, to Grundy Capital, who then subsequently sold out to Austereo. So, simply because I had, been seen to be an international youth year opportunity, it opened the door. I was invited into an opportunity I would never been considered for under any other circumstances. And it was very profitable, but also, to this day, it's still a buzz to know that I was part of that foundation team.
Sure. I'm just, I've been having a bit of trouble hearing you, James, and I'm not sure whether it's my Wi-Fi signal or yours, but chances are the rest of the world can hear you perfectly well. So, but I do want to just go on from there and ask about two things, but the first one is, how did that get you into politics? And what was your role in politics in those days?
I guess because of that notoriety I gained back then, I was encouraged to get involved in conservative politics. And I had ambitions back then because I didn't know any better about politics. So I actually ran for pre-selection for the seat of Southport for the National Party, as it was back then, and knew that I wouldn't win because there were 9 candidates and 8 of them were very talented. But it was a good opportunity for me to get an understanding of how the game is played and what's required for future reference. And my intent was to keep working in the business and then ultimately sell it and then go into politics if I had the opportunity. I learned so much about what really happens inside politics and the nature of the fact that it attracts both some very good people, but also some really self-serving, narcissistic types, that I decided there and then to be a politician. It was a great exercise for me to learn that early in life. But what I did see was that I really wanted to be part of the machine. I wanted to be able to influence policy and actually be in the side of the system where you weren't just the salesman at the front. That you were actually part of the real machine. Because I saw that's where the sort of people I admired were really based, and so I got heavily involved along the way with branch level, and then ultimately worked my way up. I got disillusioned with it at one stage and stepped aside and got away from all party politics but very quickly got involved with the Australian Small Business Association.
Yep.
And back in the Conservative Party weren't very well run, and he wasn't giving them much of a run either. And the Small Business Association was really the main organisation that was arguments and challenges to Keating's introduction of fringe benefits tax, capital gains tax. And you may recall, capital gains tax when it was first introduced was horrendous. It was twice what it is now. And so we were the lobby group. I was getting interviewed on the 7:30 Report and Current Affair and all those shows fairly regularly as state president of the Small Business Association, to the point where I then got voted into the federal vice president position. But at that stage, as happens with a lot of voluntary organisations, its core structure wasn't set up to protect it from the crazies or from the deliberate interference, whether it was just some interesting personalities or deliberate interference by what I would refer to as the dark side, but the socialist side of politics. There was so much disruption within the organisation, particularly as we were becoming more and more popular, that it self-destructed.
Yeah.
The group in Melbourne, who were the strength of the organisation at that stage, just completely split apart. So I moved on from there. I got focused on the business, and then moved overseas to pursue the satellite business that I think you're probably interested in hearing about.
Yes, absolutely. That was the next question I was going to front you with. Was so you sold out of Kennett Security here on the Gold Coast, and then you got involved in satellites. And I've never really understood the whole process that you went through. You actually, it wasn't so much the satellites, was that you had ownership of certain frequencies. Was that right?
That's right. Yeah, the business I'd set up was monitoring alarm systems, but we were also asked to do some really interesting remote things, particularly gold mine out west, and very difficult sites to monitor for local governments. Like pump wells that were very difficult to monitor in any other way with the technology at the time. So I saw an opportunity to develop something that was going to need satellite communications. So I went around the world talking with all of the big satellite companies about, could they strip down there to try and get high quality voice. I said, I don't need all that. I just need something that's as dumb as one of our alarm transceivers. And, could it just very simple code and a status report? And they all agreed that that was a great idea, but no, they couldn't do it. And then I eventually found out about low Earth orbit satellites that were just an idea, like a Sputnik concept. But no one was doing it. There were a few discrete military systems and some spy satellites up there that no one knew, but no one had taken it to the length of actually trying to develop a remote data collection satellite, which evolved, of course. Now it's an off-the-shelf item known as the Internet of Things. Requires a very similar technology to what I was trying to develop back then. And everyone said it couldn't be done, and you couldn't get global radio spectrum to be able to. I found out after I'd already done it that it couldn't be done. So I worked with the Australian Communications Authority, and then had connections with the British Ofcom, Office of Communications, ESA, the European agency. Just worked out a way that you could get this by frequencies with geostationary satellites that we couldn't possibly cause interference to because our energy was so low it wouldn't even reach them. Our low Earth orbit satellites, which were much closer to Earth than the geostationary satellites, which are the big ones parked way out in space. Worked out how to do it, and I got the Australian government to apply for these global licenses, which we won. I had no idea. I didn't even think of them as a valuable asset. They were just the means to the end for me at the time. And after I got it, I was very quickly approached by a group that saw of it and offered me $25 for my 74% of the company at the time, and of course I knew better. So I was going to be a billionaire out of this program, and so I knocked back that offer. My wife did eventually forgive me because, of course, the billion didn't turn up. The world kept turning, and just when funding lined up to build and launch these satellites, a huge satellite system called Iridium, which was founded by Motorola, but had $8 billion worth of New York, venture capital money invested in it, and it went broke within 6 months of launching, not because of the technology or the market, but simply because they hadn't worked out their pricing, and the system had been built by a bunch of engineers, and they didn't consider any marketing assessment or real world environment.
They let the engineers
stick with the numbers from five, and of course the cell industry was developing so fast at that stage. So when they went broke, it just took all the money out of the satellite industry. You couldn't raise $1, let alone 130 million, which is what I had all but finalized. And so we just dried on the vine. There are a couple of other companies that have approached it, but sorry.
No, I was just going to say that their walk, had it not been 1 week earlier, life would have been very different.
We've frozen.
Okay. I'm going to keep talking,
That's
James.
right. Yeah, it was in fact 24 hours ago.
Yep. Yeah, James, I think we've got a bit of a delay in our communication here, but I'm just going to finish off with one question.
Yeah.
If I can finish off with one question, what are the experiences that, when you look back on all the experiences you've had in life, from boarding school at TSS to life at Gordonston, the alarm business, politics, and you work with Rotary, the work with satellites, and so on. What are the two greatest life lessons that you've had as you've gone through life that you'd like to share with people who are watching today? That's if you heard the question.
You're right. The communications line here isn't good, but I got the question. First, really emotional, really great dad, and but one of the key who knows where he's going. Now, obviously, that was aimed at me, and so any ladies listening, any people who are upset with the gender of that, it applies to anyone, of course. But in my case, he was talking to me. So it was a great lesson to learn as a young man that if you have it with it, people are more likely to get out of the way or help you than they are to try and hinder you. And so I guess the corollary to that lesson was that only people that will get in your way are the people who are jealous and entitled and that want to take your idea and either come for the ride and get more than their fair share or take it from you. And they exist. They're called narcissists, and that's a subject for another discussion. But it took me longer than I should have to be able to. Well, that's one of the benefits of being in business now. I know that if you've got a goal, you set your target, that people morally or actively support you because of the nature of your relationships, and the people that get in the way are pretty easy for me to identify now, and I know how to handle them. I just wish I'd known that 20 years ago or 30 years ago. And then the other thing I've learned is the importance of relationships. I give this when I've been lecturing. I will start the lecture by, particularly to IT or MBA students, I'll say everything that you know now, all the skills that you develop, all the qualifications you gain, through your life, will account for about 10% of your potential success, and the rest of it, the 90%, build and maintain them. And nothing is truer. I defy anyone to challenge that.
Yep.
There are the smartest people, martins and engineers, and others in the world. They may do well in their little pool, but they want to achieve greatness. You know, they need to understand the importance of relationships.
Thank you, James. Our time is up today. Thank you for your stories. Thanks for your wisdom, sharing that, and taking the time to come on today and have this conversation. I'm hoping everyone got all your wisdom, because I think we've got a bit of an IT issue today, but I'm hoping at the other end everyone could hear everything you had to say, buddy. Thank you again for your contribution, and look forward to chatting again, obviously, very soon, as we do. Good to see you.
Indeed. Thanks for that.